Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this LinkedIn Live on strategic negotiation. A warm welcome also to all the ones that are watching the recording. You may have a meeting or something else that prevents you from joining us live today. And then, you can watch as you sign up for our LinkedIn Live. Then you get the recording and you can watch the event in your own time. Now I have with me the pleasure to I have the pleasure to have with me Owen Darbishire,
Hi,
professor
Giuseppe.
at Oxford, academic director of the Oxford program on negotiation. We're going to ask him to introduce himself in a moment, but first we want to know about you. And the question that I have for you today is. How did you know us? I mean, did you ended up, meeting Owen or I, one of our classes for corporate customer at business schools? Uh, um, did you were former colleagues? Did you just follow us on LinkedIn and you've seen that this event was happening? So get us to explain to us the relationship that you may have with Owen or I. For instance, here we have an MBA student that says hello, thanks, Professor Owen. So clearly we can have an Oxford MBA that is saying hello to Owen, and fantastic, perfect, and I can say without that Owen has won teaching awards at both Oxford and St Gallen. So yeah, not a surprise that people have a good memory. So that's good. Now let's.
Yeah, somebody just put up they've lost sound, and I'm glad to say I was getting very worried that it was only me that had lost sound, and I was beginning to panic.
Okay, all right. Okay, yes, it was. I touched by mistake the wrong button. So okay, thank you for letting me know. Thank you. I'm glad that you're telling us. So yes, we wanted to know that wanted to tell you that there may be a bit of a delay between the moment that you write a question and the moment or a comment that we see it. So just don't be surprised if may take a while before we give you a quick feedback. So, okay, good to see that indeed now the technical side is back on track. Fantastic. Then how about getting to know a bit more about our special guest today, Owen, if you don't know him before?
Well, Giuseppe, thanks very much for inviting me to this, and it's a pleasure to join you as always. For everybody else who doesn't know me, my name is Owen Darbishire, and I'm a professor at the Saïd Business School and Pembroke College in Oxford. I've been there since more or less the mid 1990s, and before that, I did my PhD program in the States in collective bargaining at Cornell University. As you can tell, I am English, and so my sort of interest in negotiations over the last few years have been somewhat preoccupied by the farce of the Brexit negotiations, but I have a very widespread set of interest in negotiations, from commercial to labour negotiations and onwards to international negotiations as well. And I should apologise. I did shut my dog outside the room, but clearly you might hear the odd bit of barking as it demands to come in and take the class as well.
Okay, you're a more active follower, right? Your
Exactly.
dog wants to be with you all the time. He doesn't want to miss any class. Fantastic. Perfect. Now, let's connect a bit with today's context, right? Because in the current inflationary environment, we are confronted with the challenge of claiming value, but while retaining the relationship with our counterpart. So, how can we manage this tension?
It's a very good question, because, of course, the challenge is that the inflationary pressures are real. And many companies are under, substantial pressure because of course, all of their input prices, but also in many countries we've got some sort of serious problems in the labour market as well, which are adding to the pressures that organisations have got. And that means, of course, it works two ways, which is that we've got companies who are demanding price increases from their suppliers, but also then at the other end are trying to push on price increases to other. One challenge is that when all organizations are under these, but at the same time you've got these rising interest rates, how do you deal with these? So because these pressures we know are real, it isn't necessarily the case that companies are simply trying to claim value. Some of them are just trying to survive, and they need the price increases in order to be able to do that. But we do have these conflating pressures in the negotiations, that sort of short-run drive to survive, or trying to just claim that little bit of extra value, versus making sure that the long-term relationship is sustained and long-term value creation is there. And so the challenge that these negotiations come from is not simply somebody trying to use a power advantage to claim a bit of extra value at any particular moment. And that just adds a complexity to the negotiations that are occurring now.
But let's get to the typical kind of situation. What advice will you give to someone that has to deal with either making or receiving a price increase request?
Well, firstly, don't panic, and by that I mean, it's very easy when you've got something to be very, very reactive, be very defensive, sort of hit back at the other side. And so I think the first important thing is you've got to be very careful about preparing. Right? Take that time, try to understand, get the perspective of what is happening on the other side that's leading to these requests. What are the drivers, challenges, and objectives of the other side? Having a perspective, diagnosing what is going on through this request is the first critical thing. The second is I guess, framing the interaction and the negotiation that you're going to engage in effectively, framing it in a way that's about problem solving. People have genuine problems, and so if you can frame it in a constructive manner, frame it so that you're sustaining the relationship, and try to understand sort of what some of the principles are that might enable you to establish fair price increases, which might be agreeing a principle that it's related to costs, may related to market prices, that you're not, in other words, being sort of exploited. The other is just keep that focus on value creation, not just for you, but make sure the other party is keeping the focus on value creation as well.
Okay. So what you're saying is that you talk to the people and say, listen, this is what is happening to my cost. This is the challenge that we have. These are at a big impact on our ability to manage this. And we want to make sure that in order to be able to continue to serve you, to have this, etc., then we have to find a solution, right? Somehow an approach where we see, okay, let's discuss together and let's find a solution together. Although,
shall I give you an example of a real organization very recently where there was no doubt that there was a substantial increase in the costs. There was the demand for a substantial price increase from the supplier, and what as part of the negotiation, to keep that focus on value creation, it was agreed that there would be an open book, exploration of what the cost basis was and what the pressures were on. Now, this was a food company, in fact, pet food company. And what they agreed to do with this open book is that they examined where the biggest cost pressures were. And in fact, because it's very expensive pet food, but because it was a pet food company, what they agreed to do was that they actually reviewed for the first time in ages what the ingredients going into the pet food were. And they worked out that certain prices had increased massively since the last time they looked at it. And they could make some substitutions which were going to lead to substantial savings for the customer, which enabled them then to give the appropriate price increase to the supplier. So both were able to create value as a result. In fact, in other words, it acted as that impetus to look again at the solution that they'd got and to try to improve it.
Okay, excellent. Then then you can create value and focus on the long term, right? Then it builds the relationship. The discussion is an opportunity to build a relationship and to do things. Perfect. And by the way, talking about relationship, we often hear that in negotiation there are three important components: the substance, the relationship. We just talked about those two elements, but the third one is the process. And the process is often forgot. I mean, what advice you have on process design? Not necessarily for price increases, more in general about, for negotiations.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, and the critical thing that we should never forget is, of course, that the substance of the outcome is actually the product of the process that you're engaged in. You mentioned relationships as well there, Giuseppe. Well, there's an interactive relationship between the process and the relationship. In other words, the relationship can ease the process, but the good process helps build process helps build the effective relationship as well. The process. One important thing to think about process where people get it wrong is that they think about the process as only starting at the table or only being at the table. Actually, critical dimensions of the process start substantially before that. Let's just link these two things together, the relationship you mentioned. If you focus on the relationship, how do you build that relationship? Even if somebody you haven't negotiated before, don't wait till you're at the table. Start building that process and that relationship beforehand. Phone them up beforehand, ring them, meet them, take what you can. The better, the closer you are on understanding the other person, the better quality the interaction that you're going to have with them as well. And so understand those interpersonal developments, but also understand sort of some of those the structural developments. There's the place, there's the time, but increasingly, of course, today we're on LinkedIn Live. Is what medium are you going to use? What's the combination of meeting in person versus email versus web interactions? What you're typically going to use all of many of those. How are you going to play those out? What's going to be most effective? When do you need time to take time to diagnose and to really evaluate proposals that have come forward? And then I guess just one last issue to think about would be things like the agenda. Right, there's something very powerful about sort of setting an agenda. It works as a power of a default, if you like. Once you've set the agenda, that structures what the interactions are going to be. So you've got to be really, really careful that you've designed that appropriately and not in a haphazard way. Because that's going to frame the conversation that you have. So make sure it's framed around problem solving. Make sure it recognizes what they're concerned about, but builds this potential opportunity for you to create more value.
Yeah, fantastic. So, building on what Owen says, we say, okay, if you want to work on the process before the negotiation, then talk with the other person and agree with them, okay, by when do we want to finish this? How many meetings do we need? Are they going to be physical or are they going to be virtual? Who is going to be sitting at those meetings? Do we need to copy other people? Are you the decision maker, or there are other people? What kind of topic do we want to discuss? Now, again, let me also build on this idea of the agenda. Since it becomes, once you set the agenda, it becomes the default. Then a good practice is that the agenda comes from your preparation document. So you do your preparation, you reflect and say, these are the topics, this will be the order that will enable me to better communicate the message and structure. And then, it becomes, okay, if these are, how important is the relationship? What is the balance of power? What topic I want to discuss in which order? Then this helps you to define, what is the best agenda that will smoothly get you to have a more effective meeting with your counterpart.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Giuseppe. And linking it to preparation and that careful analysis that you've just described, really can have a substantial effect on the dynamics of the negotiation.
Fantastic. We do, this is your LinkedIn Live. We are there to answer your question. Let's start to take the first two questions. One is Regina, and let's start with Regina. How do you suggest to react when your best customer wants a discount and you actually need desperately an increase of the product and engineering prices?
So, I mean, let's not pretend there are going to be any easy answers, because fundamentally at the moment there are massive tensions that many organizations are facing, and the challenge that you have got is, are there multiple dimensions? Okay, let me take a step back. The way that you create value in a negotiation is engaging in smart trades. You have to identify multiple issues that the parties are concerned about. And then what you're aiming to do is in simplistic terms, you're aiming to give away something of sort of low cost or low value to you in return for something that's high value. If you focus on simply one item, and if the only item is price, and you're asking for a reduction in price, I'm asking for an increase in price, we're framing the interaction as a win-lose situation, as a distributive negotiation. The only way that we are going to reach an alternative outcome is if we identify multiple items that we're going to engage with. So we got to move beyond simply having price as the only item on the table. And we've got to think of other terms. Is it about length of contract? Is it about payment terms? Is it about delivery options? What you can all generate multiple items that we might also put on the table. And once we've got those on the table, then we start needing to look at how we can trade across those different items. But if you just focus on the single item of price, then it's basically incompatible, and you're then down, if you like, to a power relationship. But the problem with that is that it tends to be pretty short run. You risk sort of trying to exert power, which might have a benefit now, but has a much longer term cost.
Yeah. Let's link also, the key message from Owen with a nice tool that is available there. If you, then we. So you identify, the kind of things that you want to win. You identify the kind of things that you're prepared to give away, and then you use the sentence, if you, then we. So let's say that you want price, but you're flexible on contract length. Then you may say, if you give me a 10% price decrease, I will give you an extra year of contract. If you give me the payment terms on 90 days, then I'm prepared to change the minimum order quantities to X, so that you get something that you want and you give in return something that the other party wants, and that is not going to cost you much. By the way, there are more questions, but since Regina, as a sales vice president, has joined our Strategic Negotiation Masterclass 2 years ago, then I take the opportunity to quickly present you the Strategic Negotiation Masterclass that Owen and I will have in June in Geneva. So 27 and 28th of June, nice season to come to Geneva in Switzerland and spend some time with both of us. We will be at the Hilton Hotel, and that's is just in front of the airport and in front of the train station. So easy to reach, even if you are you have to travel, you have to fly, or take the train. That's is a very convenient kind of place. Because, you know, one thing is to learn about strategic negotiation in half an hour. Another thing is to learn in 2 full days, plus 1 extra day of remote learning that goes through over 2 years. So that's the opportunity that you have if you come to Geneva on the 27th and 28th of June. Now, the price of the masterclass is 3,000 Swiss francs. Now, the good news is that as you are joining this LinkedIn Live, then you have the opportunity to get a very special price of 1,800 Swiss francs. So a 40% discount, but the 40% discount is only valid until next weekend, the 18th, 19th of February. So this gives you, you know, a couple of weeks to get approval from your management or whatever, and then sign up for, then, you know, you get 2 professors in one shot at the cost of a basic program with any kind of training company. So what you have on the chat is the link to our event. So I hope that you check it out and you may be with us in June. Okay. End of the advertising, right? You know, I think, you know, the aim is to learn during this session together. So let's take the next question and let's see what is important. What are the real problems that our audience is facing today? In the seller market scenario, how would you help buyers to navigate this inflationary market dynamics?
Well, I guess it sort of, you know, comes back to the challenge about what the sort of time period that you have to think about this over. In one sense, it's not just a sort of the market. The pressure on markets is both on sellers and buyers at the moment, and the pressures are coming from different directions, and that makes it much more complicated to analyze. And of course, if you look in Britain, what you'll find in supermarkets, for example, where you've got these powerful buyers and suppliers, they keep reaching loggerheads, and they keep reaching situations where Heinz will stop delivering something to Tesco's or another, and they reach an impasse. But of course, you're also seeing that in, again, I'll take a British example, if people will excuse that, of the labour market pressures, where you're seeing a number of strikes, including some substantial strikes today, where there are financial pressures on both sides of the table. There are financial pressures on governments with budget deficit. There are big financial pressures on individuals with the cost of living being squeezed. And the challenge, you know, as we talked about before, is, you know, what ways are there of trying to reorient this for sort of for medium and longer term value creation, to sustain the relationships as best you can, but use it as an impetus and an opportunity to create more value, to revisit the contracts that you've actually got, to think about ways that those can be improved. There is almost always untapped value in most contracts. You know, you've reached a satisfactory level of value creation. The chances are that's acted as the template for the next few years. There are new opportunities there. Use these pressures to really revisit those contracts and see how they can be improved. What smart trades, what, as Giuseppe was talking about before, what if then options there are. Now that's going to take quite a lot of creative problem solving, but it can be well worth the effort. So don't just get into a fight about the price increase where it's a distributive or a win-lose situation. Try to use this as an opportunity to do that creative work to try to add value for both sides.
So we can also start, a quick thing that many procurement people get wrong is that when the supplier comes for a price increase, the typical answer is, how can you justify it? And when the supplier can justify it, and most of the time they can justify it in the current context, then somehow it becomes difficult to say, okay, I understand that your costs are increasing by 80%, bad luck for you. Now, another way to do it is to say, well, how can we work together so that we eliminate this price increase?
Yeah.
And then, this forces the parties to see, okay, we are not there to immediately accept your price increase. Let's say you don't want to make it easy, right? Because if you want to make it too easy to accept the price increases, then of course, you will have many price increases coming your way. But at the same time, you may still say, how can we work together to eliminate this price increase? And this, if we build to the example of Owen before, then okay, maybe reformulate the product, changing the ingredient that you put into the pet's food, maybe a way to get you to take care of your cost and us to continue to have a competitive price in the market. Excellent that there are many questions, so let's continue with the question from the audience, and now is the moment of Nabil. Should we think about including automatic increase of yearly subscription fees directly in the contract based on future potential inflation? Had this idea from one of my partners, but I found it difficult to apply if I put myself in the buyer.
Yes, I mean, of course, I think the challenge will be if you try to put that.
Sorry, I cannot hear you, Owen. Owen, I cannot hear you. I think
Can
it is
anybody
time
else
maybe
hear me, or is it
your
something
side
happened
that
at my end?
something happened.
Is it just you, Giuseppe, or perhaps
Still
somebody
cannot
can
hear you.
Can anybody else hear me? I think that's the question.
Let's see. Let's see what is happening.
I'm still speaking. You can't hear me, Giuseppe. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can anybody else hear me?
Okay. We'll find a solution. I don't know what is happening. Oh, okay. Looks like the
your
problem is on
end,
my
Giuseppe,
side.
or mine?
Okay,
If anybody
then
in the
keep
chat is
going.
able...
I guess
Okay.
it's me
Giuseppe,
that has
they
touched
can
the
hear me,
wrong
so I'm
button.
going to...
Okay, keep going.
Okay, they can hear me, right? Okay, I think the challenge, of course, if you try to put these increases in right now, there are many contracts actually, and it is quite typical in contracts that there actually are there are clauses for increases based on the rate of inflation, and the question is, how are those particular dimensions formulated? Much harder to do it at the moment when both sides are experiencing this substantial increase in price pressure. So there'll probably be quite a lot of resistance to putting it in right at the moment, because the implications, if you like, are themselves rather clearer. But I think that if you want to have long-term and fairly sort of stable relationships, then actually it is worth thinking about actively about the extent to which there are due to be price increases, or the extent to which you anticipate productivity increases, and therefore prices are going to increase by less than the rate of inflation, which would be another sort of typical scenario.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's see if there are other questions. Okay, I see a lot of comment, but it was mainly fact that the sound is around the sound. Great. So let's take a different let's take a different perspective now. In a negotiation, we have objective and subjective value.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say something more about subjective value? Because everybody is clear about the objective value, but how about the subjective value?
Yes, I mean, just to be clear, of course, people never know quite how well they've done in terms of objective value in negotiations. People often come out of a negotiation feeling that they've actually got a very good objective value from this. In other words, I've done really well. You can measure it from your own side. You're never quite sure what the counterfactual was, what it was that you might have been able to achieve. And part of the difficulty in learning in negotiations is precisely learning about what was possible, and that's to do a plug for my own negotiations training. Of course, one of the points of negotiations training is that it's the only opportunity you can get proper feedback as to what was possible, rather than just what your perception was at the end, which are the subjective perceptions, right? And one of the critical things that we know is that people's perceptions at the end, their subjective value, their feelings, their own feelings about the outcomes of the negotiation, for example, very much impact what is going to happen in the future. So there are typically 4 aspects of subjective value that we care about, or in a negotiation. Those are what is the belief of the party on how well they did in terms of the outcome. Was the outcome balanced? Was it fair? Did I receive a good share of the pie that was developed? Can I sell it internally? Can I, will I get pushback from within my own organization for having reached this settlement? So those all impact what my feelings are about the particular outcome. But I've also got feelings about other things. Do I think that the process was fair? We talked about agenda earlier on. Did I think that the agenda was structured in a way that gave me an appropriate voice in the negotiations? Did I feel I was listened to? Did I feel I was respected, that we had information exchange, that there was learning in the negotiation? So that's about the process, which of course we talked about before. I've also then got what my feelings are about the relationship. Have we built a good relationship, perhaps based on the similarities that we have identified between us? Have we built some trust? Do I want to interact with you again, right? Have we engaged constructively? And then I guess, so if we've got outcome, process, and relationship, the last is much more my personal feelings at the end of a negotiation. How do I feel about myself as a negotiator? Do I feel I was respected? Do I feel I'm competent as a negotiator? That I'm skilled as a negotiator? Now, all of the importance of those 4 dimensions is that they have a big impact on both the reputation of the other side will have, but critically, absolutely critically, they have an impact on future outcomes. In other words, the subjective value today can increase the objective value you create in a negotiation a year down the line. So one example would be, we know that, for example, for employment negotiations, those people who end up being employed, who have a higher subjective value about that process, the process by which they were hired, not the objective salary level that they've got, but their feelings about was the outcome fair, and how did the rest of these elements go, indicate things a year later, such as turnover of employees, willingness to stay, job satisfaction, and job productivity. So there are substantial benefits that come in contractual negotiations by paying attention to this.
Mm-hmm. Well, this makes me think about the old saying, okay, we talked about the relationship, the outcome, the process, all those kind of things, but I want to insist for a moment on the point about how the people feel about themselves, about their own competence, etc. Because there is this old saying, with things being equal, 99% of the time we do business with people that we like, or with people that makes us feel good about ourselves.
Yep.
So, if you make the people feel good about themselves, about the process, that's something that is going to be valuable to you.
Well, both are true, of course, Giuseppe, because we like people who make us feel good, right?
Exactly. And then, the other element is how can you help your counterpart to sell the deal internally?
Yeah.
How can you make sure that they will feel the hero? They will go back and the manager will say, yes, well done, Margaret, you signed a great deal, as opposed to say, well, Margaret, yeah, but it's difficult. But exactly. So
yeah, it's sometimes known as how do you help them write their victory speech in the negotiations. Spend your time, make, because there's no point in trying to reach an agreement, with the other party, and if they're not able to successfully sell it internally. Because remember, you're not reaching an agreement in order just to sign the contract. The point of agreements is they've got to be implemented. And in other words, they are part of an ongoing process. So if you don't help them sell it internally, then you're going to have trouble further down the line.
Yeah, maybe let's dig a bit more on this topic of the subjective value, because emotions shape negotiations. I mean, what are your views on this topic? By the way, I see that there is also a question in the chat, then we're going to take it in a moment. Let's first talk for a moment about the emotional component into the negotiation. And
yeah, well, I guess the question just leads me to go for a moment, wow, because it's a massive topic. So I don't think we could do justice unless we were going to sit here for a couple of days or something like that. I mean, one starting point would just be to recognize that probably 85% or more of our decisions that we make are emotionally based rather than rationally based. And that's a sort of a critical dimension for people to understand. When we, the challenge, let me pick just one dimension if I can, but you can ask me to think about more afterwards, Giuseppe. But one of the challenges comes in sort of managing our emotions when we're in a negotiation, and that can be a big challenge. It can be a challenge for many people on personal negotiations. They're engaged in a salary negotiation or the negotiation to engage in a new project where they feel substantial anxiety. But those feelings, for experienced negotiators, occur when they're interacting with the other side. So there's a real challenge in trying to manage those emotions. And people sometimes talk about, don't show emotions, show a poker face and so on, which is problematic for for multiple reasons. One is that emotions contain information, and that information can be about the nature of the offer that you've got. But it's also just a social interaction. If I'm interacting with you and you display no emotional response to me, it's like talking to a picture. You stand there trying to talk to a picture. You can't do it. You're going to stop really quickly. So you've got to have that engagement, and that means displays of emotions with the other side. The other problem with sort of trying to suppress emotions, if that's all you're trying to do is to suppress them, is that you'll still feel them internally. We know from a lot of the psychological research that the physiological impacts of the emotions are still there. They're still clouding your ability to think rationally, right? And therefore to evaluate proposals that put on the table. So a much better approach, rather than sort of suppression of emotions, is how you prepare in advance for the emotions that you're going to experience within a negotiation. Anticipate them, understand them. It's known in the psychological literature as cognitive reappraisal. Be prepared for what those are. I think that this type of negotiator, or this individual, from what I've discovered about them, is going to become angry in the negotiation. So I know that when they become angry, this is part of the role that they're playing. I don't have to take this personally. I'm prepared for it, and I'm ready with my response. Comes back to preparation as well. It's not a personal attack. It is part of their strategic response. So be ready with managing your emotions before you go into them, rather than let them surprise you in the negotiations. I could pick up any further angle you might want to on negotiation, on emotion. There's so many.
No. But Owen, we have to give them also a motivation to come and join us for the
Sorry,
today
yes.
workshop, right?
Yeah.
We are not going. Let's face it. You're not going to be able to cover everything, in this half an hour. But just in case, on the 27th and 28th of June, we do have our masterclass on strategic negotiation in Geneva, an opportunity to come and visit Switzerland, and it's currently 40% off, only until next weekend, the one of the 18th and 19th of February. So I hope that you will take this opportunity and check the link that we have on the chat, where you can find out some more. Okay, but just to continue on the story of the emotion, I want to also link it to trust, because if you display a certain level of emotions, then you're going to be perceived as more credible kind of person, and it's going to be easier to trust you. If instead, you try to make an effort to have a poker face, that's something that at the end of the day may have an impact on your ability, to be seen as a trustworthy person by your counterpart.
Yeah, so emotions are contagious. That's the critical thing. We know emotions are contagious. So if you're displaying happy emotions, engaged emotions, sort of you're signaling that interpersonal relationship through your emotions, then the other party will respond to those. But equally be aware that they're contagious when you start becoming angry. If you become angry, they're contagious. The party becomes angry, and then you get a downward spiral.
Yeah, fantastic. Perfect. Let's take one of the questions from the audience. Here we have Abdullah. What is the best negotiation strategy with single or sole source supplier? How can we shift the balance of power in such circumstances?
Okay, it's a great question, because when people have a single source supplier, the danger is that you feel that all of the power rests with the other side. But recognize that actually that's often a perception rather than a reality. Because of course, you can still be an important sort of customer for them, and if you stop buying from them, or if they push it too far and woe betide, you go out of business, then they've lost that profit, that relevant profit as well. So I think one of the critical things is to try to be, take a step back and analyze it. Actually, what are the different dimensions of power? And power isn't just that. It's not just that sort of structural element. They can stop selling to you. Selling to you. There are also the elements of power which come from their reputations, come from the long-term profit that they're able to make, come from the increase in purchase that you're able to produce in the future. So start thinking sort of broadly about how you create value for them. In other words, what is it that they risk losing from you if they try to exploit their perception of power, sort of too much? But I think the other thing to do is not to allow the negotiation to get caught up just on power. When people talk about negotiations, some of the time that creates in people's minds an idea of a power claiming value distributive win-lose negotiation. What we need to do is that one of the things we're going to have to reframe the negotiation around problem solving, around value creation. So perhaps sometimes don't even use the word negotiation. We've got a problem to solve. How can we do this most effectively? Rather than we need to negotiate this. And just changing that framing can change how they think about it and lead you to a better resolution.
Yeah, fantastic. Abdullah, by the way, I worked in procurement for over 20 years. And from my experience, the biggest mistake that we as procurement people make is looking too late for alternatives. Right? You have a negotiation next week, and then you say, okay, let me start to prepare. What can I do? And guess what? If you start the week before and the supplier is coming next week, then the possibility that you're going to come up with a better way, that you're going to strengthen also the power, both real and perceived power, will be limited. Now, a different approach that I will encourage you to take is instead to say you take a new job, and then as you take the new job, then you talk maybe with the predecessor, say, okay, which are the challenging relationships that I have in my job? What are the contracts where there are difficult situations that may have an impact in terms of supply, in terms of cost, in terms of quality. And then, you start working 18 months before about start looking for the solution. And by the time comes that the contract is close to the end, you will be in the right position to manage this. Let's take one more question from the audience, from our friend Regina. When do you think is the right time when being a small and medium enterprise to take the CEO in the meeting, or is it better to leave him in the background?
Or her. So I think a couple of the things you need to think about is firstly, what you're clearly saying is twofold. One is, what is the authority of the negotiator, and what are the bounds of the authority? It can be incredibly useful in a negotiation to have somebody externally who's got to approve the negotiation or to approve whatever it is that you're offering. And that's a really important. So limits to authority to negotiators are actually a valuable tactical tool that people should have. So don't, if you take it in, if you put the CEO in there too early, you're losing that tactical tool. So then the question goes, if you leave them in the background until you reach those critical moments where there are the last few elements where you're really stuck, where you need that authority in the room, and you can then bring them in. But really, you want to leave it until that particular moment. Now, there can be, of course, exceptions to this. For example, sometimes a negotiation may get stuck sort of fairly early, and you can have an interplay. It might be the two CEOs know each other. They're able to come together, break a law, the barriers that are faced there, and then pass it back to the negotiators. So don't think about this as simply going one way. I simply escalate. There may be a time in which you're going to change the parameters of the discussion, and then it goes back to the negotiators with the CEOs still sitting in the background.
Fantastic. Perfect. I think, we cover a good amount of ground. Owen, thank you very much for this chat together. Thank you for our audience that brought some very interesting questions, and to the ones that will join us virtually and will be listening to this. And I hope that this maybe inspire you to say, well, negotiation in the current context in particular is a skill that I want to work on, and maybe join us on the 27th and 28th of June in Geneva. Maybe the right things to do, and benefit from the 40% rebate that is only valid until the weekend of the 18th and 19th of February. And hope to see you there, and we will both be there together, and it will be a pleasure to interact with you and continue this learning journey around strategic negotiation that we started today. Thank you again, Owen. All the very best to everyone, and look forward to reconnect with you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.